Called in order at 6:38 p.m. We'll start with roll call. Can I get a pen? Thanks. Pekis.
Here.
Patel. Is coming. Corchain.
Present.
Himes.
Here.
Daniels.
Here.
Giordina. Not coming. Lowe.
Here.
Nakvi. Polaris. Bergen. Catherine, how do you pronounce your last name? Bluin? Bluin's here. Obviously, Lou. Not here. Salem. Smith. Sochet. D'Angelo. Alvarez.
Here.
Bosco. Casazola. Chen. Cheng. Chaudhry. Chow. Craddock. I'm here. Giordina's not here. Gooding.
Here.
Wiggins isn't here. Grant. Not here. And Fursha.
Here.
Innes. Jones.
Here.
Clock. Krishna.
Here.
Lundin. Lakshkar Nayagam. Manfredi. McCabe. Maniti. Modi.
Here.
Paul. Perez. Rana. Rana Parth. Rifkin.
Here.
Rowe.
Here.
Sargent. Schofield.
Present.
Smith.
Here.
Verbeek.
Here.
Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry, not Daniel. Violet.
Here.
Sorry about that. Ward. Wanneberger. Wiley. So that's a roster. Is there anybody who would like to be recognized for public comment? Seeing none, we move into approval of the minutes from November 14, 2012. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Give it to Chaudhry. Is there a second? Schofield really wants it. Sorry. Are there any questions? No? Debate to amend anything or no? Okay. Then we move into a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes from November 14, 2012, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstentions. Clearly passes. Next, we move into reports of the executive. President Pekis.
Hello, everyone. I'm sure most of you heard by now that University of Connecticut received a 5% cut in their budget from the state of Connecticut today. It was more than we were expecting. We're still kind of gathering our thoughts on the situation. Not really sure where the cuts are going to happen. President Herbst made it pretty clear that it's not going to come from the academic core, so it remains to be seen what exactly we're looking at there. But rest assured that we will be involved. I encourage you all to be involved in that process as well. Set up meetings and do what you have to do. If this is a big situation, we were hoping this year that we could avoid any further cuts to our block grant, and that is not the case. Furthermore, we were hoping we could avoid any general cuts, and that is also not the case. So we're looking at about $15 to $20 million, and it sucks. So that's that, and that just came out today, so I really don't have anything huge for you on that. Another thing is that the athletics issues obviously is getting a lot of press right now. Anytime that we end up on national news 7 or 8 times a day, it's worth considering, even if it's not something we traditionally deal with. So, as you also know by now, UConn's been passed over for membership in the ACC. As for now, leaving us in the Big East. This is I don't know at which point this becomes something that USG has to look at, because obviously the athletics programs are extremely important in attracting students to the university. They provide a tremendous amount of revenue for the university, and there are questions that are worth asking about the long-term viability of our athletics programs if we don't find another conference to join. So that's something that we'll be looking at the next couple of days as well, and I don't think it's outside of our responsibility to ask those questions. Furthermore, I've been meeting with the candidates for the provost position over the past couple days. Yesterday was Henry Foley from Penn State. Today was Moon Choi, who's our own interim provost. And then tomorrow is David Rosowski from RPI. We've been having interviews. I've been very impressed with the 2 candidates so far, and we'll be forwarding recommendations to President Herbst on Friday. Beyond that, the student recreation facility is progressing nicely. We're having a meeting between myself, President Herbst, the designers of the facility, the Director of Recreational Services, and the Chairman of the Board of Trustees on December 14th. Hopefully that goes well. We'll get more information then. I do believe that we have a final plan for the building, which is exciting. And I think that's all that I have for you.
Are there any questions for the President? Thank you, President Peckus. Next, we move into report of the Vice President. Vice President Patel.
So this past couple of weeks, I was working with the Provost Search Committee, and as you guys know, we have our 3 finalists. I hope you go look up their bios and their CVs, and obviously Stephen is going to recommend someone. So if you have any suggestions, I hope you let him know. If you get a chance to attend one of their presentations, it would be really helpful. And I think they're very qualified individuals. Something that I'm working on right now is I think Chairperson Daniels is going to talk more about it, but what do we, we got this big cut from the state. Where do we go from here to make sure that UConn's interest is protected in the state legislature? So I'm going to be working closely with him on that project, and there are small things going on within the office, and if you have any questions about that, just let me know. But that's it.
Are there any questions for the Vice President? Sure.
Oh, I forgot to mention that I am meeting tomorrow. I think it's at 12:30. So if you're available to come with me, I would really appreciate if maybe 2-3 of you can come along. It's the chairperson of the General Education Oversight Committee, and we are going to be talking about just general issues within the university when it comes to general education requirements. So if you are able to attend, just let me know.
Are there any other questions for the Vice President? Thank you, Vice President Patel. Next, we move into report of the Comptroller. Comptroller Corchain.
Good evening, guys. Quick report. First, I've been working on our preliminary budget. I don't have a fully detailed one for you today. I'll send that out as soon as I can, but as of right now, we're still waiting on that. However, the important number from that is what funding board is going to be able to use for budgeting for Tier 2s next semester. Pleased to say that we will be able to give a record-breaking amount of funds to Tier 2 organizations through our new system on the order of about $500,000, which is more than we ever have before. And we'll have more information on that next week when you guys are all going to be here to go over the funding budgets and pass those in our special Senate. Second, quick note, we've made some progress, kind of surprise progress, on updating our funding system. Some of you may have heard that the university is switching their financial software to a system called Koali. There's actually a chance that we might be able to use that software, and it's freeware, so we won't have to shell out any money in order to use that. It's good news on that front. And finally, I would like to make an appointment based on our Senate before Thanksgiving. We now have a vacant seat for Director of Inventory. Cody Grant has graciously stepped up to the plate on that one. So if I may make that nomination.
Is that a Senate confirmed position?
Sure.
Sure. All right. Is there a motion to nominate Cody Grant? Okay, Violet. Second, Alvarez. Are there any questions for the or does the nominee accept his position first? He's not here, but
he accepts.
All right. Okay. The comptroller will field any questions for the nominee, I assume. Are there any questions? Sure.
On the area of funding, I know right now, sort of talk about inventories and audits, but was that all of it as well?
Yes.
Are there any other questions for the comptroller? Or the comptroller's nominee, rather? Seeing none, we move into a debate. Is there anybody who would like to be recognized for debate? Seeing none, we move into a vote. All those in favor of ratifying The comptroller's nomination for the Director of Inventory Policy, Cody Grant. Please signify by saying aye. Opposed, please signify by saying nay. Abstentions, motion passes. Congratulations, Mr. Grant. Are there any questions for the comptroller? Seeing none. Thank you, Comptroller Courchain. Next, we move into report of the Chief of Staff. Chief of Staff Knockby.
Hey everyone, I'll keep this really quick and short for you guys. We've sent out about 25 million emails so far about Saturday, or not Saturday, Friday for the winter ball. If you have not RSVP'd, please do that today because we might not have any seats left since we opened it up to +1. Besides that, well, first of all, if it is +1, if you are bringing a +1, you must email me ahead of time before you come on Friday. That's enough about that. Remember, Secret Snowflake will be taking place there. So even if you can't make it, please give us your gift ahead of time. Moving on, we are still looking for a new communications director for next semester. So if you have any interest in that, email me, email Steve, and we'll get back to you.
Are there any questions for the Chief of Staff? Thank you, Chief of Staff Knockby. Next, we move into report of the legislative. How's it going, guys? Everybody seems very busy. A couple years ago, one of my predecessors, years back, proposed a state of the legislature. That's absurd. I'm not going to do that. That was like 8 pages. He printed it out, sent it out to everybody, distributed it, whatever. I'm not going to do that. But what I will do, or what I will say in my last report of this semester is, over the course of this semester, ever since I was elected, I assumed this position, and ever since you guys were elected to your positions and started to assume your responsibilities, we've grown a lot, we've matured a lot, we've done a lot. Doing a lot doesn't necessarily mean going out into the administration and going into those meetings. Not yet. Right now, what we have been able to do, and what I can feel very proud of, is getting people back involved and engaged in the work that we do, at least on an internal level. And that's something that was a major focus of mine back when I ran on April 25th, and that's the message that I won on. What I will say is for next semester, we have begun planning. What we want to do more of is the actual going out and advocating, working on the policy. Everybody is doing phenomenal work on the committees, in the respective committees. I know because I've been there. Sarah's giving me a smile. She's seen me at one too many meetings. But doing great work. We look to continue that. We look to continue legislating. And we look to continue our expansion outside of just this room. So I feel very good about where we are, and I feel even better about where we're going. You guys have any questions for me? All right. Advocacy training, in the beginning, we're going to figure that out. Me, membership coordinator D'Angelo, Gina from community outreach. We're going to get together and talk. We're also going to get a room for next week because we need one. We don't have one yet. That's a special session on the funding, and that's about it. Cool? All right. Next, we move into report of the judiciary. There is none, so we move into reports of the committees. Himes for AC Affairs.
Hi guys, did you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving? Eat lots of turkey. I didn't have turkey, I don't eat turkey, but it was still a wonderful Thanksgiving. So AC Affairs, wrapping up the semester, we're doing care packages like we normally do. That'll probably be sometime during finals week. Last year we had it on Thursday, which is like the reading day. We might change it up, we'll see. Also, the other thing is Elliot is working with the co-op to get like academic apparel instead of just sports apparel, so you can buy clothes for your school or other schools, which I'm going to be doing, so I seem more smart. But that's pretty much it.
Are there any questions for the chairperson? Thank you, Chairperson Hines. Next, we move into Court of Resident Affairs, Chairperson Daniels.
All right, so as President Peckus started talking about in his report, today was a very disappointing and trying day for us at UConn. The ACC news was, I think, disappointing to all of us. It says a lot about where we're going as a university and our need to continue to build our academic reputation as well as to keep going with athletics as we have for so many years. And I'm confident that President Herbst and the administration is doing just that, and that as we got these numbers today about the budget cuts, that it's not going to affect the hirings, the new professors that are going to come in. So I think we're very happy that although we got very disappointing news about the deficit mitigation, that we're going to lose 5% of our budget for this fiscal year, that we're still making the professor hirings a priority so we can continue to move up in academic stature, and that the student-teacher ratio does not continue to suffer. So let's talk a little bit more about the cuts. So this is a deficit mitigation program, which is different from the regular budget. What happened is, this is from the budget that was already passed nearly 2 years ago. The revenue estimates for that budget were very, very short. So the governor is authorized to have to readjust this budget so that it can be balanced, or at least close to it. And so this is different from the budget process that we're going to go through in the spring, where we're going to have to make the same arguments all over again. So we really don't have much control over these numbers that come out today. So what's happening is there's about $9.6 million cut from our operating expenses. When you add in everything else from the stores and regional campuses, it's over $10 million. When you add in fringe benefits, it gets up to about $15 million, and then there's an additional $25,000 cut from the health center. So that's quite a bit. We knew this was coming since we knew there was going to be deficit mitigation a few weeks ago, but I'm not sure any of us expected it would be this high at 5%. So when we move into the spring and we have to make our case for the next 2 years of budgets, it becomes additionally important that we highlight the importance of this university and keeping it affordable for students going forward. Time and again, it becomes easiest to cut higher education from a state budget because you pay in as students. There are a lot of programs in the state where if they're cut, they're cut. Either they're lowered, the amount of service that's there, or they're ended. With you, the burden is placed on you, the students. So it's your responsibility to help us to make the case to the legislators that enough is enough, and that while we believe in shared sacrifice, us sacrificing more than the state as a whole is not going to be tolerated. So what I'm asking you to do over the next few weeks and over the winter break is to ask your family, ask your friends, to find people who can testify for us, who can make a case about how important UConn is to the state. So if you're a student who's struggling to pay tuition, we want to hear from you. If your parents are having trouble paying for your tuition, we want to hear from you. If you know someone who owns a business who relies on UConn students in that business, we want to hear from you. If there's anyone you know who can make a case that the more educated Connecticut's workforce is and the easier it is for the students to pay, we want to hear from you. And we want to go before the legislature and we want to tell them that there's so many people, not just us as students, who benefit from us being able to afford this school and this school continuing the rise in stature. So I want you to think about that. I want you to talk to your constituents as senators. I want you to talk to anyone you can talk to over the break, because if there's anything that the student government can do to affect your tuition and how much you pay, it's making this case to the legislature that as we're going to be cut, and we're going to be cut, the deficit is very concerning. It's very bad this year. But please, if there's anything you can do over the break as a senator, as a member of this organization, please reach out to people and help us make this case.
Are there any questions for the chairperson? Thank you, Chairperson Daniels. Next, we move into report of funding board. Senator Benetti will be delivering Chairperson Giardino's report.
All right, hi guys. We are working on spring 2013, all the funding applications and getting that ready for you guys to vote on next week, so more info will come to that. I also need to make 3 nominations. Motion?
Yeah, you can motion because you're a senator.
Okay. Josh Paul, Colleen Kelly, and Mayran Payed. I don't know how to say his last name.
Okay. Do the nominees, are the nominees here? Or?
Josh is.
Josh is obviously Senator Paul, but neither of the other. So do the nominees accept their
Yes.
nomination? Okay. Are there any, oh, is there a second for the nomination first? Senator Alvarez. All right. Are there any questions for the nominees? No. Seeing none, we move into debate. Is there any debate regarding the nominations? Seeing none, we move into a vote. All those in favor of ratifying said nominations, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, please signify by saying nay. Abstentions? Motion passes. Congratulations, Senator Paul. And, are there any
That's it.
questions for Senator Minetti? Thank you, Senator Minetti. Next, we move into report of student affairs. Chairperson Lowe.
Hi, guys. Okay. So we're looking for next semester right now. We have a safety walk coming up probably in February. Other than that, we have obviously spring weekend that we're gonna have to deal with. And for this semester, we just had the second International Coffee House 2 weeks ago, and it went really well. I don't know if Ozzy, if you wanted to talk about it. Yeah, can I yield the floor?
Sure.
To Ozzy? He's the person that ran it, so.
Hello, everyone. Yes, because I'm Alice Diversity Chair. So the event I did was International Coffee House, and the purpose of the event was to showcase diversity on campus, just to make students more aware of the diversity that we have, because a lot of students forget all about it. But the event was awesome. We had a variety of different performers, UConn Irish, UConn All-Stars, just to name a few people. So I don't know what else more to say about it. It was hot. It was an awesome event, and I appreciate everyone who helped me.
And I hate to do this, but I need to yield the floor to Ian also. That's okay.
Sure, of course.
I did residential affairs for student affairs this semester, so 4 area councils applied for funding. Northwest Area Council applied for funding, but they were not funded due to lack of 3 quotes. They said they had them, but they didn't show it to us, so nothing really we could do about that. Towers applied for funding for a bus trip to New York. They were not funded due to the lack of 3 quotes. They used the incorrect application, and it wasn't for this semester, so they didn't get anything. South Area Council was funded in full for t-shirts for an event, and West Area Council was partially funded to $1,016 out of a requested $1,550 due to the $2 per resident cap. That's the decision that Senator Minetti and Vice President Patel and I came to. All 4 passed unanimously. And also, I am also looking for letters of intent to take over my position of Chairman of Residential Affairs inside Student Affairs as I'm graduating. So if you want that, send me an email, short paragraph, why you want it, why you think you'd be good at it, anything like that. So that's all I got.
And thank you, Senator Schofield. And are there any questions for the chairperson? Thank you, Chairperson Lowe. Since we have no unfinished business, we now move into new business, an act concerning funding, OFSL Community Service Trip. We'll pull up the legislation. President Peckus and Comptroller Corchain are the authors of this legislation, and we'll be presenting that to you.
All right. So as Ed is passing out the legislation, talk a little bit about the background behind it, and then I'll read through it once. I'll take questions. We can have debate. In 2009, Jason Ortiz, who was comptroller at the time, approached community outreach because he felt as though USG was not funding community service initiatives in the way that it should be at the university. At that time, we worked with community outreach for a period of months to determine the best way for USG to fund these interests, and it was determined that we would fund 50% of student costs for alternative spring breaks at the University of Connecticut. At that time, community outreach was the only group on campus that was planning and administering these trips. Since that time, community outreach has expanded their program to the point of saturation. So when I say that, I mean they cannot plan any more trips. They don't have the administrative capacity or the financial capacity to provide any more opportunities for students at UConn. If they did, we would fund them, because that's the commitment that we have made and we have reaffirmed time and time again since 2009. The reason for that being that we find value in the alternative break, and we believe we should subsidize student cost for going out into the community and providing direct service. This year, an opportunity presented itself in which the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life would plan their own alternative spring break trip. It's important to note that in doing so, they worked in close communication with the Office of Community Outreach in following the exact same breakout structure and learning outcomes that we initially found value in. It should also be noted that they are currently the only department on campus that is doing so. It was my understanding of the agreement that was made with community outreach that we had made a commitment to funding alternative spring breaks at the University of Connecticut, not alternative spring breaks planned by community outreach. And as a result, this new opportunity is exciting, and it's a good step in the right direction. So without further ado, I will read through it once, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. All right. An act concerning funding for the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life Alternative Spring Break to Indianapolis. Whereas the UConn Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, I'll refer to them as OFSL for the rest of this, under the direction of Todd Sullivan, has planned an alternative spring break trip to Indianapolis specifically designed for the interest of Greek students at the University of Connecticut. Whereas the aforementioned alternative spring break trip has been planned in close consultation with the UConn Department of Community Outreach, follows the same breakout models and learning outcomes as community outreach sponsored trips. Whereas by virtue of USG's ongoing support of community outreach, a relationship that began in 2009, the undergraduate student government has signaled its commitment to promoting and helping to fund all alternative spring break trips at the University of Connecticut. Whereas the undergraduate student government, conscious of its responsibility to provide for the general welfare of every student at the University of Connecticut, sees tremendous value in this trip planned for Greek students by the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. Therefore, be it resolved, the undergraduate student government agrees to fund 50% student costs for the alternative spring break trip planned by OFSL, not to exceed $3,100, to be taken from the executive committee budget. Be it further resolved, the undergraduate student government affirms the responsibility of the executive committee to create and sign a memorandum of understanding with the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life that will lead to the successful implementation of this legislation. Be it further resolved, the undergraduate student government will review the process by which university departments apply for alternative spring break funding for the 2013-2014 academic year.
That's it all, Mr. President.
That's it.
Are there any questions for the President or the Comptroller? Senator Gooding, Senator Alvarez, Chairperson Daniels, in that order. Oh, we have more questions. All right, hold on. Chaudhary, Wiley, Schofield, Parth Rana, Krishna, Neo Rana. In that order. Did you get that? Okay, it's Schofield, Ozzy, or Senator Gooding. Can you just hold on for a second? Yeah. So we got up to Schofield. So we have Gooding, Alvarez, Daniels, Chaudhary, Wiley, Schofield. If I don't call your name, please raise your hand again. If I did not call your name, please raise your hand again. I'm sorry, just this side, okay. Rana, Krishna, Neo Rana. Parth Rana.
I don't want to subject you all to my grammatical mistakes and poor wording choices.
All right. Senator Gooding, you have the floor for questions. Yeah, either or. Sergeant Arms, can you move that mic back to a more reasonable distance? Thank you.
Come up to this one.
And turn that one on.
Okay, hello? I just had a few questions.
This one.
Musical mics.
You're killing me. All right, so I just had a few questions. So my first question was, are all undergraduate students eligible to attend this trip, or is it just like Greek students? Students that are involved in like fraternity or sorority.
Right. It's available to students who are a part of the Greek community.
Only.
Right.
Okay. So I have a question for the comptroller. Are you a member of a fraternity that is eligible for that trip?
I am.
Okay. And I know you mentioned something about the funding, but I missed it. So, would we fund this trip from the additional revenue fund that you try to get control over last?
That's not a fund.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay. So where would the funding come from?
It would come from the executive committee budget.
Okay. And I'm curious to know, did you present this to the executive board?
Yes.
What was their response? Were they for it or against it, funding the trip?
It is unimportant. We had a discussion on it. We didn't vote.
Okay.
Yep. The executive committee is not a legislative body, and as such shouldn't be making decisions on things like this.
Okay, so you won't be able to give us any insight as far as what...
I don't think it would be responsible to talk about what statements people made for or against the legislation.
Okay.
If they want to come up and...
Minutes for that were approved.
The minutes are public. If any of the executive committee members would like to come up and talk about what they discussed, that's fine, but I'm not going to go through what each of them said. Furthermore, I can't remember.
Would any of you all like to come up? I'm just curious.
Yes.
This is Senator Gooding, this is a questions period.
Okay.
So we will only deal with questions pertaining to the legislation as presented by the President and the Comptroller.
No problem. All right,
Thank you,
thanks.
Senator Gooding. Senator Alvarez, you have questions? No questions. Is there Chairperson Daniels? It's the back one? Oh, okay. All right.
Mr. Speaker, I've asked the President, whereas in the legislation it says this trip has been planned in close consultation with the Yukon Department of Community Outreach. Has the Department of Community Outreach talked to you about how closely they have been working with this Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life? And if so, how closely is the Department of Community Outreach involved specifically in this break?
They're heavily involved. I got off the phone with Gina today. We spoke for quite a while. They've been involved in every step of the process, from the planning to the budgeting, to the recruitment, to the learning outcomes, to the specific plan from day to day. This is a CO trip that's being managed by a different department.
I would ask if whereas in the legislation it says that the memorandum of understanding with community outreach indicated that the student government has signaled its commitment to promoting and helping to fund all alternative spring break trips at the University of Connecticut. Does the memorandum of understanding specifically say that it will fund all trips or trips that are sponsored by community outreach? And if so, is this trip truly sponsored by community outreach, or is it only being planned in conjunction with community outreach?
Well, the specific agreement that was made with community outreach, by necessity, only applies to the trips that are being planned by community outreach. You know, as a contract, there's no way that can create any kind of rhetorical flourishes that might signal a greater responsibility for public service. But I do believe that the agreement was made with the understanding that this was something that we wanted to fund. Although this is not a community outreach trip in name, it is in spirit. And so you're not going to find the exact language that'll tell you that's the commitment we've made. But I do believe, and you know, feel free to disagree, but I think that's the commitment that we've made.
Thank you.
Yep.
Who else? Senator Chowdhury, questions? Thank you. Senator Wiley, answered. Senator Schofield, you were recognized for questions.
Am I that
Senator
good?
Rana, Parth Rana. Yep.
Just a simple question. The way that you, in the legislation, it says that the OFSL trip will be funded through the executive committee budget. Where exactly is the budget for the community outreach trips? How did we fund those?
Those are also funded through the executive committee budget.
Senator Krishna, question? Any questions?
I just had a couple of questions. I wasn't really sure what do they do on the alternative spring break trip? Is there like a quick summary of like what they would do and why Indianapolis and like what the detail is?
Yep. Typically, alternative spring breaks. Obviously, alternative means that there's no drinking or any kind of other behavior like that involved. Usually, that includes smoking cigarettes, tobacco, any kind of alternative. So this is hard to explain, I guess, but it's alternative. I think we all know what that would seem to suggest. It's a service trip. So what they do is they wake up in the morning, they go and provide direct service in the community. They work through organizations that are established in the local area. Typically building houses, building fences, mowing lawns, clearing brush, painting walls, doing anything the community needs them to do. The specific reason that Greek Life chose Indianapolis is because that's where a lot of the Greek headquarters are located. So they'll be providing direct service to the community from around 9 to 4 every day, which is the same that community outreach does. And then at night, when community outreach trips are usually playing apples to apples and Monopoly, they'll be going to the Greek headquarters and visiting with leadership development teams and things like that.
All right.
Yep.
I was just curious. You said therefore be it resolved the USG agrees to fund 50%.
Yep.
What are the specifics of the 50%? Is it that they just take the overall itinerary for each student and cut it in half, or how much the fund?
So during the budgeting process, they develop participant cost. Participant cost usually is a combination of the food that they'll be eating, the cost of housing them in the specific location, the cost of any supplies that might be necessary to complete their mission, rakes, paintbrushes, ladders. It does not include something that they've decided to make a part of their trip, which is water bottles and t-shirts. We have decided to cut that out of the amount that we're requesting to fund. These are things that, it's the same things we fund for, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. The same things we fund for every other CO trip. It's essentially just the housing cost, the food cost, the supply cost, and the transportation cost.
All right.
Yep,
Thank you.
of course.
Thank you, Senator Krishna. Before Senator Rana, you're recognized for questions. Mr. President, do you have a copy of the budget that we saw that maybe you can put up?
Yeah, I do.
No, I just meant if they wanted to see it.
I don't have an electronic copy.
It's fine.
I can tell you that they've estimated the participant cost at $540 per student. They're taking 12 students. It's also important to note that we won't be funding the professional staff that are going on the trip in accordance with our rules.
Senator Rana, question? Chairperson Daniels?
First thing I wanted to ask is how many people usually go on a community outreach sponsored alternative break trip?
So it varies. They do a couple big trips, usually to New Orleans. Then one other big trip, they take a huge coach bus. They drive down there. They usually take around 55, 56 people. Smaller trips are made all the time to New York City for the weekend, to Boston for the weekend. They go down to Appalachia for a week. They bring 12, 13 people. There's really no one single answer I can give you. It varies. But generally, I'd say the vast majority of trips that they sponsor are very small, 6, 7, 12, 13 people.
For those smaller trips, how much does it usually cost per participant?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Another thing is, you said that community outreach has trouble accommodating all the students who want to do it. That's why it's good for OFSL to be taking part in this, correct?
That's right.
So one question I had is, are other departments aware that they can do this, that they can sponsor alternative spring break, like the cultural centers, or even tier 2s?
Absolutely.
Because,
Okay. Yeah, university departments should be completely aware that they're at liberty to develop any kind of program that they wish to. That's the simple answer there. Tier 2s are aware of the fact that we have an agreement with CO by which if they apply to USG for funding through the Tier 2 process, they can receive funding for their alternative break trip, and then they receive training from CO. But yeah, absolutely, university departments are well aware that this is something they're able to do.
Point of information.
Sure.
Was the question, what's the cost per person for the other trips?
The question that Senator Rana put forth regarding the cost per person was on the smaller trips. President Pre- Okay. Yes.
Boston for 12 people, 240. New York for 12 people, 420. Providence for 12 people, 300. Boston for 12 people, 240. New York in the spring, 420. And New London in the spring, 420.
Those weekend trips, Syed?
Those are all weekend trips. And the weekend subtotal for 72 people for all the trips is $2,040.
So how many days and how many nights is that? It's usually 2 nights and 3 days.
Chief.
Well, those are weekend trips. Total for 2040. Then there's alternative spring break trips.
Chief of Staff Nakvi, if you could please use the microphone and make this information public. The other thing, if you could, is this the cost of the total amount per person or the amount that USG would fund? In other words, 50%.
50% USG funding source participant per person.
Thank you.
Do I have to say the numbers again?
Please.
Fall Boston, 12 people, $240. Fall New York, these are all weekend trips. Fall New York, $420 for 12 people. Fall Providence for 12 people, $300. Spring Boston for 12 people, $240. Spring New York for 12 people, $420. Spring New London for 12 people, $420. This is $72 people total for $2,040. For alternative break trips, there's the Appalachia one you were talking about for $1,800 a person. There's Atlanta for 18 people for $3,600 per person. Biloxi for 48 people for $12,150. The same price for New Orleans, like President Practice was talking about. Then there's New York in Connecticut for 12 people for $1,400. Philadelphia for 12 people, $1,680. West Virginia for 18 people, $3,600. Oklahoma for 12 people, $6,000. Washington D.C., 12 people, $1,920. Week-long subtotal for 192 people is $44,300, which is $810 per person.
Thank you, Chief of Staff Nakvi. Point of information, right?
That's the price that each participant would have to pay absent USG funding. So USG cuts that figure in half.
So if they pay 800, they'd only be paying 400.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, it's a tremendous program we have. And to be clear here, the 540 would be cut to 270 per person.
There are other questions, in fact. Senator Rana just went, so Vice President Patel. Thank you, Chief of Staff Nakvi.
Can you just, did we cut, I don't remember this, but if you can remind me, did we cut the amount of money that community outreach receives compared to last year?
Yeah, we did. The reason for that being that historically they've asked for somewhere around $53,000 to $55,000. Traditionally, they've used about $38,000 to $39,000. And as a result, we were getting about $14,000 to $15,000 per semester that were locked up and that we couldn't use. And so we made the decision to change the way in which we were funding CO to $20,000 per semester, which will be allocated so that they have time to look at what kind of fundraising they have and to get back to us the number. What's important, and I think what gets to the heart of your question, is we still hold the commitment to fund 50% of all student costs. So there's been absolutely no cut in the commitment. It's just a cut in the way that we allocate the money. And really that's just so we can roll the other $14,000 to $15,000 into Tier 2 funding. Because it was just being locked up and it was, cobwebs were forming around it.
Because it seems a little paradoxical on one hand that you mentioned that they couldn't, one of the reasons why they couldn't fund more trips was because they don't have enough money. But on
Yeah, I mean, the student cost is only part of the trip cost. So they don't have the money in terms of paying staff, paying student leaders, paying other kinds of costs to have more trips. And more USG funding is available to them if they need it. It's very clear in the MOU that if they do go above what we've allocated, we'll just re-vote on it because the 50% commitment is as true as it was in 2009.
And is there a reason why historically they have used less than what we were giving them?
Yeah, the reason is usually partly because of fundraising. They encourage all of their students to fundraise, and usually that comes in a lot higher than they had expected. Greek Life's doing the same thing, and also because a lot of the times it's just part of a complex budgeting process. So when they're sitting down, think of it this way: if you were trying to lobby USG for money, you would want to ask, if you were tier 2, you'd want to ask for the most you'd possibly need. You'd want to cover all your bases. But when you actually come in at the end of the year, you don't care about covering all your bases because you know exactly how much you spent. So if it comes in below that, that's fine. You just don't want it to come in over. So they've historically asked for more so they could make sure that they could fund all their requests. We're still going to fund all their requests. It's just we've opened up more money for other things.
Okay, and how much are this trip that's being proposed in this legislation, how much are they raising?
They're going to raise as much as they can.
But because I remember they mentioned a number.
Yeah, what they do is, this is what they put out an expectation of how much they want each person to raise. And so they've asked each person to raise somewhere around $25. They'll most likely come in above that. I don't know how much community outreach generally asks people to raise. Usually what CO does is they'll give you like 15 letters and they'll ask you to send it out to all your relatives. I don't know if Greek Life's doing the same thing as that. But they're going to raise literally as much as they can, and then we will receive the reimbursement from that. Yep. So in other words, if we pay 50% right now, it would be $270 per student. If they raise enough money so that the student cost is bumped down to $480, we're not going to still pay $270. We're going to pay $240. So we'll get $30 per participant back.
And you were quick to answer the question about does the other departments know that they could come to USG to receive funding for these kind of trips, right?
Yeah.
I had a hard time coming up with a location where this is mentioned.
Well, the question was, do other departments know that they can plan alternative spring breaks? The answer is unequivocally yes. If the question is whether or not they know they can come to USG for funding, you'd have to ask them.
Okay. And do you think that we have made known to other departments?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that we as an organization have made it?
We have not advertised, no, absolutely not. And by practice, it's probably not a good idea to advertise to university departments that we're willing to fund them.
Okay. And so, okay.
Thank you, Vice President Patel. Next, Daniels, Chairperson Daniels. Something.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the President if he can provide documentation showing whether or not the groups involved have attended breakaway trainings from the Department of Community Outreach.
I don't have the documentation.
Thank you.
I don't know if they have. I know that they will.
Is there anybody else who would like to be recognized? Yes, Senator Jones. I didn't see. Oh, and Senator Lyon.
The current community outreach trips that are wholly handled by community outreach, can any student at UConn theoretically attend those?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that they do offer a variety of trips that are open to all students at UConn, but also no in the sense that they offer trips through specific learning communities that are not open to all students. So they have a history of supporting trips that aren't open to all students.
Are you sure that the learning community trips are not open to non-learning community students?
Absolutely. Well, it depends on how you want to phrase that. Preference is given to learning community students. So if they had a 50-person trip and they had 60 learning community students apply, even if those students weren't as well qualified as the other students, they would get preference for the trip. So only in the rare case in which they couldn't recruit enough people from their own learning community to attend the trip would there be an opening up to the general student population.
Okay, but for example, if they had 40 students for a 50-person trip, then 10 students who were not from our learning community,
Yeah, it's not something that happens, but yeah.
And so, for the hypothetical trips that maybe a department would plan, would those could you bar it based on, say, the history department planned a trip? Could only history majors?
I think this is a discussion that we could have. I mean, if Greek life, for some reason, couldn't get 12 applications, I'm sure they would, and we would encourage them to open it up to the general student population. The fact of the matter is they received far more than 12 applications, and it was never a discussion that needed to take place. You have to understand, their interest is to fill the bus. If they don't fill the bus, they're losing money. So they're, of course, going to open it up to as many students as possible if they can't recruit enough from their own department. And if they can't recruit enough from their own department, I'd question whether or not they should be holding the trip at all. Yep.
Are there any other questions for the president or the comptroller regarding? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Ron. I can't see over on this side. Sorry, Senator.
Theoretically, if more departments were applying for this funding, would we have a hard cap of how much we would be giving, or would it be 50% of everything? Because I know exec only has a certain amount of money.
I think a hard cap isn't out of the question if we were to experience an influx of department requests, but right now that doesn't exist. So it's a hypothetical problem, yeah, absolutely, but for this year it's not a real problem, and that's why the last clause in the legislation suggests that we should develop a process, and when I said process, what I had in mind was a hard cap, so yeah.
So considering this is a good opportunity for departments, why would it be bad to advertise it?
It's not a bad idea. It's just it's unprecedented. We've never done it before. We've never advertised to university departments that they can come to USG for funding. I think it could be troublesome in that we'd be getting a lot of applications for events that they're sponsoring on campus. For instance, if the history department wanted to host some kind of speaker to come, we wouldn't necessarily want them thinking that USG is a bank that they can come to fund that, because that's honestly something that the department should be paying for on their own. But what we have right here is a department that's made a commitment to an alternative spring break. This money is not going to the department. It's going directly to offset specific students that are going on the trip. So what's going to happen is if Matt is going on the trip, he's going to receive $270 from USG to not have to pay that as part of his application. So I guess when I misspoke. We've never advertised before. We could, but it would have to be very targeted advertising in what exactly we're looking for. Because we definitely don't want to open them up to think that they're like tier 2s, because they're not.
So would we be able to create a process where it would be conditioned around an alternative spring break, and we could advertise it to all the departments, so cultural centers and other departments can use this funding?
I don't know, could we?
We should.
I think we could.
Are there any? Senators? Put Schofield down.
So you mentioned that the headquarters for some fraternities and sororities is in Indianapolis.
Yeah, weird, right?
Yeah. So my concern is in regards to the interest of the fraternities or sororities going, and if they'll actually be completing the alternative spring break, and if there's any type of monitor or any person going to actually make sure that they actually fulfill the program and they're not going there just.
Oh yeah. I mean, they've got a schedule here that says they'll be working from 9 till 3, and so I guess, are you asking like how do we make sure they're not lying to us?
Yeah, how
well,
to make sure that they're not just going.
I'd like to think that, I mean, they have university staff going on the trip, so I'd like to think if they were lying to us, there would be some pretty heavy repercussions. Furthermore, these are highly honorable people. I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. I suppose I believe if you think lying is a possibility, I can't really help you. We don't have a monitor going, no.
But you said there is staff from the university.
Oh yeah. The director of OFSL is going on a trip, Todd Sullivan. And furthermore, they have to report student activities, what they do. So I'm sure student activities would have a problem with them not completing the alternative spring break aspect of their alternative spring break.
All right. Thank you.
Senator Schofield?
As Greek organizations are tier 2 organizations, do you think this may perhaps set a precedent for them applying for funding for other explicitly Greek events in the future, such as for semi-formals or philanthropy events or something of that nature?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna let Ed take this one, but I will say this, they are tier twos and they can't apply for those things through the tier two process. The reason this is different is because OFSL is planning the trip, not a specific sorority or fraternity.
But could this set sort of a precedent for that? Is there any wordings in funding boards saying that they can't do it? Would it sort of, would it sort of tip their knowledge to saying, oh, we can get funding for something that we're doing?
As a matter of fact, just in terms of the intricacies of funding policies and funding policies being fair to all tier 2 student organizations, if a fraternity or sorority, any fraternity or sorority, whether it's academic, social, cultural, any of them, can apply for ESSER funding right now and receive funding, provided that it's not against any of our restricted policies. The reason why they usually don't is, one, they're remarkable at fundraising for their own activities, and two, many of those things that you just mentioned that could be concerns are things that are already on our restricted policies list. For example, a semi-formal would be considered a social event. We don't fund social events. So if a proposal were to come to us that was in line with what our policies are, we could in fact fund them, and we would. We do. Many of them already ask us for funding for things.
Thank you. Senator Schofield, Senator Gooding, for questions?
Okay, maybe I missed this because people are asking so many questions. I'm getting confused, but
Me too.
I would like to know if the Greek life or community outreach, excuse me, has the $3,100 available. So why are they asking like for funding? Is it because they don't have the funds in their
Sorry?
account?
I don't understand
So
your question.
they're asking for this half of the trip to be funded, the $3,100.
Yeah.
Do they not have these funds in their account, like community outreach?
Well, the funds come from students. So the idea here is to subsidize the cost to students and to make it more affordable for students, not to somehow subsidize the department budget.
Okay, I
Yeah,
was just
so
curious.
I mean, they can get the money once they ask for checks from all the people who are going on the trip. But the goal is to make it less expensive for the people who are going on the trip.
And I also was wondering too, because I know you mentioned that other departments can do like a community outreach trip. Because I'm also like co-social chair for WISO, and it's funny that this legislation came up because last week we were talking about how we would want to do like an alternative spring break.
Yeah.
So the department that we're under would be like the AACC, African American Cultural Center.
Yep.
So if we wanted to do something like this and we needed money, would we be eligible for funds as well, and how would we go about doing this?
Yes, you would. You know, this is the thing. Just because we have specific ways in which we traditionally fund things doesn't mean other ways don't exist. So I can think of any combination of possibilities by which we could fund things at UConn. We could fund things for, I couldn't even go into hypotheticals. There are plenty of ways in which we can fund things. So yes, of course, AAC would be eligible for USG funding. The only things that aren't eligible for USG funding are students who aren't part of an accepted degree program at the undergraduate school, and grad students and professors and faculty members, administration, parents. Yeah, so if you're a student at UConn, you're eligible for USG funding. How you would do it, you'd have to plan an alternative spring break. And it's not an easy process. It takes months and months and months. And you know, if you were able to accomplish that, then this is absolutely something you could pursue.
Okay. So would you consider like advertising, like for like, well, the other departments telling them that they could do this, just because I know I mentioned to a few of my constituents about like how we were going to be voting on this legislation, because that's what we're supposed to do, vote on behalf of our constituents.
Yeah.
And they were just telling me that they never knew about it. Several people that I spoke to in the cultural centers, and a few of them was like they would like to do something like this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, a process needs to be developed.
Okay.
So we could absolutely develop a process, and if the recommendation of that group that comes up with a process is that we need to advertise this, then we would advertise it.
Okay.
If their recommendation is that we don't want to advertise, then we wouldn't.
All right.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Senator Gooding. Senator Wiley?
So, it's my understanding that Greek Life already gets a lot of money through membership fees from their individual members. So are they not able to pay for the trip already through the fees that they get? Because I've heard that they're substantial.
Yeah, well, the fees are paid directly to the fraternity or sorority that they belong to. Those are used for a variety of things, social events, parties. What else do they pay for?
Philanthropy is community service.
Right, yeah, so community service and things like that. So the money doesn't go to OFSL. So it would be weird. It would be like, I don't know if I can come up with a good example. It'd be like if the NFL wanted to fund an event and you asked the New England Patriots to pay for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wiley.
Thank
Senator
you.
Himes? Oh, I'm sorry, Chairperson Himes, and she's good. Okay. Vice President Patel?
If you can, I just had a question, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to clarify. Can this trip
That makes me uncomfortable.
Can this trip be done without USG's help?
Yeah, I assume it does. Yeah, I assume the students. I assume the students would grudgingly be willing to pay 500 and whatever some odd amount of money.
And do you remember what was Mr. Todd Sullivan's answer to that question? When it was asked in exec to him if his department would be able to make this trip happen without USG's funding. Do you
Well,
remember?
the answer is absolutely yes, they could.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was his answer.
There's no doubt that they could make the trip happen without our funding. There's no doubt that CO would be able to continue operating as they do without our funding. It's just, it would hurt students' wallets.
Okay. So the only reason that it's being brought to USG is because students would have to pay more.
I think this is
and
called
my
leading the
question-
witness.
I'll allow it.
And my question is, if they could, are the students having a hard time paying for it?
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't seem right that they could pay for the membership, but they
Vice President
can't.
Patel?
That's my question.
I mean, I can pay $200 for, a cheap iPad, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't hurt my wallet.
Vice President Patel, thank you for your question. Who do we have next on the list? Senator Schofield would like to be recognized. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to be recognized for questions? Okay. Dr. Schofield.
Would the $3,100 out of the exec budget be damaging to any other programs?
Nope.
Thank you.
Senator Cate? Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to be recognized for questions? Senator Manfredi? Oh, is there somebody else on this side too? Anybody else for questions over here?
Okay, I just wanted to revert back to a point. You said that they were getting a lot of applications despite the fee.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, community service is something that UConn takes great pride in. In fact, we were recognized as one of the top schools in the country for our alt service breaks. So I think it's something that students are willing to throw their money at because we're good people. It doesn't mean that we should be paying a lot for it.
Thank you, President Pekis, for an exhaustive. Oh, now we have more questions. Cool. Senator Rana. The questions. And I'll remind this body that the questions should be pertaining to the legislation put forward. They are, for the most part, but I can see some emotion behind these questions. So let's hold that for the debate, if possible.
Can we get a sort of a breakdown of exec's budget in how we would be able to fund this?
Absolutely. So at the beginning of the semester, we allocated roughly $70,000 to exec's budget. That was to cover the ice cream social, which you guys remember. That's to cover the New York Times that's funded. That supports all of our internal spending. So when we bought the marshmallows, when we're having our winter ball, that's where all of that comes from. Incorporated into that was also roughly. It started out as about $5,000 and grew to about $10,000 of money that I included as initiative funding, like things that if we wanted to jump on an opportunity that didn't currently exist, community outreach was also incorporated into it, and that extra money that hasn't really been pushed towards a specific thing is just kind of sitting there. We've already kind of earmarked some of it to go into savings for some of the projects that I've been talking about, but that's essentially the backbone of exec's budget. We don't really spend a lot of it on really anything except for our programs and what we run. Those are the big things right there. Life raft debate, that's what I missed. That's pretty much what we do. Anything that we program, it usually comes out of our executive budget. Otherwise, that money is just going to get rolled into savings and we'll probably push towards funding board, where it'll end up with students anyway, but with a less targeted initiative.
So would funding this come from this semester's exec budget or next semester's?
This semester's.
Senator Rana, is there anybody else who would like to be recognized for questions regarding the piece of legislation? Anybody on this side? Thank you, President Tracus and Councilor Cochain, for an exhaustive round of questioning. We can move into debate. Is there anybody who would like to be recognized for debate? And I suspect Schofield, Chairperson Daniels, Chairperson Hines, in that order. You may take the podium.
As some of you may know, I'm a member of a fraternity, Beta Theta Pi, here on campus. And that sort of colors my opinion, how I see things. However, due to the questions, it's really influenced me to see that these are students who are volunteering their spring break, that they could go, Cancun, let's go to Mexico, let's go party. But instead they're saying, we're gonna go and we're gonna service a community. It may not be our community, it may not be the Storrs Manfield community, but they're still going out and they're sacrificing both their time and their money to go out and help someone. And as we heard, this money wasn't gonna do anything. It was eventually gonna get back to the students. It was gonna go into funding board, be split up, fund some random events. But instead, we as a Senate can take the initiative to put this money into helping some people where we know that it's going directly into community service instead of some random event, which is why I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, Senator Schofield. Chairperson Daniels.
I am not here to debate the merits of this alternative spring break trip. As Senator Schofield just said, this is very admirable that students who are members of fraternity or sorority organizations are willing to spend their spring break helping to do good in the world. I'm very happy with that. USG has opportunities, that will have an opportunity to fund this trip. But the question that's being placed before you right now is whether it is appropriate for us to fund the trip through this piece of legislation. And if this is the process by which we should fund this break, as it will be, it perhaps could set a precedent for other breaks or other initiatives put forward by university departments. And it's my opinion that this is not the proper way of going about this. Now, Chairman Giardina of the Funding Board is not here right now because he has an exam. But I know that he's also very concerned with this process and how it relates to the funding policies that we worked so very hard last year and this year. Chairman Giardina, Comptroller Cochain, Chairperson Lowe, myself, and many others with their input to come up with a way that would fairly and equitably fund things that students want to do on campus to improve our campus community and to improve communities, in this case, in Indianapolis or wherever. And so I want to refer you to those funding policies we passed, specifically Section 3.2. And that authorizes any new organization, a Tier 2, who has not yet qualified to apply for funding. Keep in mind, all the sororities and fraternities are Tier 2 organizations who could apply through Funding Board. It also, in the case that someone was not able to go through the Funding Board process, which right now, since we've already done the funding applications for the upcoming semester, they would not be. But but it also sets aside a place for any student, whether or not they're a Tier 2 or not, so they would not have to form some new overarching Tier 2 for all sororities and fraternities or anything like that. Any student, any representative of the Greek life community could come here, and they could apply through this Senate, which there's going to be money set aside for you next semester to fund things that have not gone through the funding board process. These policies are not going into effect until the next semester, spring 2013. And therefore, we have not made an effort to publicize this new process. So for those of you who have said, well, I didn't know someone could come to the Senate like this and just apply for funding for something they want to do outside of the Tier 2 process. Well, we haven't advertised that yet because we haven't started that yet. That's going to start next semester. And if sorority and fraternity life would send any representative of their community on campus next semester, they could apply for that funding to fund this trip. I want to also talk about this memorandum of understanding that we have with community outreach and whether or not this is a community outreach trip. The president, when you ask questions about whether or not everything's being taken to make sure that everything with this trip is in line with the principles of community outreach, says, oh yes, of course, it's community outreach in spirit. They're doing everything as anyone normally would through community outreach. But then when questions become of why isn't this just going through community outreach in the first place, it's, oh, they don't have the resources, they don't have the time nor the money or the staff to fund this. So that seems a little bit inconsistent to me. The Memorandum of Understanding says that USG will set up 2 annual trainings for all student organizations who are interested in seeking USG financial support for an alternative break. This opportunity was made available to the sororities and fraternities who are Tier 2s. They could have applied through that process. Other organizations do apply through that process. The Honors Program has alternative spring breaks, which are open, as we referenced in questions, to other students if not enough people from those learning communities apply. They go through the Tier 3 funding board process. Habitat for Humanity has alternative spring breaks. They go through the funding board Tier 2 process. If we are to just approve this, we just kind of go around the process, the structure that we work so hard to create, the precedent that we've set for how we go about things. And it does open the opportunity for university departments, because right now we're looking at funding something planned by a university department and not undergraduate students, though it does benefit undergraduate students, and I understand that. This is presented to us by a university department. Now, I want to tell you that when we were considering the funding policies, something that came up again and again was something called the Von der Baden Appreciation Society. And that was something that was set up as a Tier 2 to help a university department fund what they couldn't fund, which was lighting in the Von der Baden Auditorium. If we can just fund this through Senate without any precedent, without any structured process, we open the door for anyone, university department, to try and manipulate the way we fund things to get whatever they want. And I think that's dangerous. We talked about the funds that members of sororities and fraternities already pay. This came up in questions, and we were told that they already support community service. We were told that they could fund this without our help, and I still think that they'll get our help. I just think that it needs to go through this process that we've set up for them. But we were told that the money that they already spend goes to things such as parties. So I just want you to think about the tone that might set if we're funding things that's offsetting the cost when they have that priority. Just something to think about. Senator Gooding, you asked if a member of exec would come forward and talk about how this went in exec, and I'm happy to do that for you. Because there was a lot of concern about this in exec, and I believe that if this could have been passed through exec and avoided the Senate altogether, that the authors of this would have done so. I'm not sure of that, but that's the sense I get. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Daniels. Senator Verbeek would like to be added to the list. But Chairperson Himes is next, and Senator Schofield would also be looked at.
Hi. Okay, I'm just gonna get a little sunshine to brighten everyone's mood. All right. So Ozzy, I'll answer your question as well. From my point of view, I agree with Chairperson Daniels. I believe that if this would have passed in our exec committee, it would not be presented to you today. It was discussed in exec whether or not we should bring it to you. The minutes aren't up, so I can't show you that. But I know that that was mentioned, and before we started debating it, it was decided that it should not be brought to you. So just to give you a little idea, but I can say that in my personal opinion, I think if you were a member of the university outside of USG, outside of Greek life, and you saw this pass, what would you think to yourself? I'll just leave you with that.
Thank you, Chairperson Himes. Next, recognize Vice President Patel, and we'll add some rest to the list.
So much of what I had to say was said by my two colleagues who sit on the executive committee. But I just want to expand and say that I do agree with them, and especially Chairperson Daniels. The reason why the reason why we are even talking about this in Senate is the fact that it was not going to pass in exec. The votes just weren't there, and that's why we are talking about this. Okay, so look at from that perspective. And you know what? I was here last week, or last Senate, arguing that not one person should have the ability to use the funds the way they chose to. And I'm glad that I stood there. I was right, because this is what happens when you let one or very few people take advantage of the situation. And I'm not going to say that that's what is happening here, but I was right that could happen. My other concern with this is the fact that I think this could be done through a different process. If the process was in place, we could fund it. There would be no problem as to whether we should be considering it or considering the funding or not. But the process isn't there. Not every department on campus knows about this, if they could get money or not, and that's not how we should conduct our business. If you're gonna offer this opportunity to one department, we should do it to all, and we know it. We know it. The economic times are tough. Departments are having to cut their budget, and you know what? You know where they're gonna turn when they have to plan events? To USG, because legislation like this, you know what? We have become a bank, and let me tell you who fought about this. My good friend, our comptroller, to change our image from a bank to student government, and that's where we are going back to looking like a bank in this university. And I don't think that's our intent, to be a bank. And I think the opponents on the other side would say, you know what? Well, we are speculating. No, this is not a speculation. The numbers are there. Our president mentioned the university, altogether is getting 15% cut from the state. So money has to come from somewhere for these kind of programming. But we are not cutting. What we are not cutting is academics. So what are we cutting? Events, trips. That's what we are cutting. So other departments are going to come to us and say, our budget is stringent. If we want to allow more students to do trips, which only allow our members to go on them, then they're going to come to us. I think if the process was there, if every department on campus knew about this, then I would not have a problem with funding this. Since only one department came up with this, essentially they are the only one who are being qualified for this funding. Equality and equity is the question here, not the merit of the trip. No one is arguing if the trip is good or bad. People are arguing if it's right to allow one department to get money from us and not the others. That's the question here. And I hope you think about equality and fairness, not merit of this trip. Because That's when we fall, when we make this too emotional, not logical. We have to, yes, it's compelling when someone comes up and says, you know, it's great, our students are helping people. Well, you could, if you really want to help people, you don't even have to go on this trip. You could go to Hartford and help people. You could go to Mansfield stores and help people. You don't have to go on a trip. So there is just one way of doing this. There are many ways to do it. And let's think about it. Is this where we want to go? Do we want to look like a bank? Do we want to destroy our reputation as a body that is not fair to every department on campus, every category of students? Because in this legislation, they're only helping Greek organizations and Greek students. We were not, the other departments, history majors, political science majors, human rights majors, cultural centers, they did not know about this. It wasn't fair. And I hope you will take this into consideration when making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Patel. Starting now with Violet.
Hey everyone. So let's take a step back really quick. Because we do want to keep this up, good debate, right? So not too much emotion, keeping it very nice and focused on what we want to talk about. So I'd like to just kind of talk about some of the things I've noticed about why I kind of think this trip would be, first of all, let me put my position out there. I would like this trip to go through. I would like this legislation to pass. I'm also not in any, or related to any fraternity, sorority, or likewise. So I'm not involved in any of those. So I've heard a couple of things come forward from people both against and for this legislation. I'd like to first clarify a couple things. I've heard people against legislation both say that there isn't a process for it and that there is a process for it. Chairman Michael Daniels raised the point that there is a process that exists for funding these trips, these alternative break trips. And I believe those, and it sounded like to me he was using, so one example he used was the honors break trip. However, that isn't through the honors program itself. It's a student-created trip through HASB and Honors Council. So it is a student-created trip. It's a tier 2 organization. That's how they apply for their funding, and that makes sense. And that's how they do their funding. That's perfect. We fund their trip. That's perfect. Fund 50% if we fund it. Now, this trip, however, is run through a department and not a tier 2 organization. Now, I can understand if there was a motivation by students to create a tier 2 organization to fund this trip. As it stands, however, I don't think those processes would really apply to this trip, mainly due to the way that funding is allocated to tier 2 organizations. If that makes sense, as it currently stands. And now that's another thing. I'd like to mention this. This isn't something that I don't believe this will. I believe the only thing that this sets, only standard this sets, is the fact that we are willing to fund more alternative spring breaks. The final, if you could scroll down actually. Right there. The final point basically says that we want to look at this process about how the departments can fund these trips and say, all right, this is a one-time deal, but we're going to look at these. We're going to look at these trips, and we're going to figure out a good way to both advertise and to get this information around, and to basically, and if that's what we want to do, and figure out how we can get these departments involved. Okay. Another thing, the vice president mentioned that USG was turning into a bit of a bank, and I agree with him. It shouldn't be a bank. It should be a student government, and it should be held in such a way where we help students on campus, the undergraduate student body. I don't see funding more alternative spring breaks as any way that we aren't just furthering that goal. We do already fund spring breaks. Funding more of these alternative spring breaks, I don't see that necessarily detrimenting that standing or how people view us. So let's see. Another thing, a lot of times people have mentioned that this was not passed in exec. I don't necessarily think. Keep in mind, I think I was said with a lot of emotion. I don't think we should really take that into account as the Senate body. Okay, right now we need to focus on this. It was brought to us to see if we think this is a good idea or not, right? So what exec thinks, we don't really care about, right? We don't really care about what they think. We want to decide for ourselves. So I just want to put that out there. But besides that, that's all I think I have for now. Thanks, and hopefully we can continue this good debate.
Thank you, Senator Violet. Senator Beek.
Hello, everyone. I'd also like to say two things. One, I am a member of Fraternity Sorority Life, a member of the largest fraternity, and I would like to say I am against this, mostly because as the largest, there are a lot of guys in our chapter, and I've not heard of one who's taking advantage of this opportunity. It certainly is a great opportunity, but I'm kind of surprised as to why, like, my fraternity, we do over 1,000 hours of community service every semester, why no one has taken advantage of that opportunity. I know a lot of kids in the other 3 biggest fraternities, and I really haven't heard of anyone in those. So I don't know if it's a particular fraternity or sorority that is targeting this, and if so, why aren't they putting funds forward? I know in my fraternity we have specific funds set aside. We send 5 to 10 kids to Utah every year, another 10 kids down to North Carolina, and we always have funds set aside if somebody wants to do something like this that we can contribute to, help them out so it doesn't hurt their pocketbook. And also, I just say personally, I also disagree that it shouldn't only be limited to Greek life. That's just not fair. Like, if someone else wanted to do it, they wanted to go to Annapolis for some reason, they should be allowed to. Just because I'm in Greek life shouldn't mean that someone else can't come along. And I think that my brothers, all 116 of them would also agree with me on that. So I'd like you to please keep that in mind.
Thank you, Senator Beek. Senator Schofield. Senator Schofield. Oh, sorry.
Hey again, I'm back. I'd just like to point out that 11% of the university students, undergraduates, are part of a Greek organization. So anytime you have 10% of the students there and doing something, it's a significant portion because we're representing them as long with regular students. They don't have a trip specifically for them as till now, but still they're 10% of the population. I also have a few issues with what Jigish said, saying that exec wouldn't have passed, didn't have the votes, but that doesn't matter at this point. This is a Senate issue at this point. It's not an exec issue. It's what we decide as senators, not what the exec did or did not decide because they didn't vote. It doesn't matter. Also, the suggestion that he said that they were taking advantage of the system, I'm a little bit confused by that because the system is there. I'm not sure how they're taking advantage of it. Going on saying just because they haven't applied for it in the past doesn't mean they haven't been able to, and saying that it's not fair that they're getting their funding but nobody else applied for it because they didn't know. Well, they didn't know, but now, we have the daily campus here. They will know from now on. So next semester, if they want to apply for something, next fall, if they want to apply for something, they can now because they will now know. Just because no one knew before this semester doesn't mean we should be prejudiced against, be like, oh, nobody else knew, but you guys figured it out. So you can't get it this semester, but if you apply for the next spring break, you got it. I don't think that's right or fair. I think also one of the issues is when people are talking about how we shouldn't, open this up for everybody because, be a lot of spring break trips, but I think that'd be great because we'd have more of our students going out and doing community service instead of going out and drinking or sitting at home playing video games. They would be going out in community service, expanding the name of our university out, across the country to show we're UConn students. We care about the community. This is what we're doing. We're good people. We don't just have a good basketball team. We have a great community that we're willing to expand across the country. I personally know the person who ran it last year. They did do this last year. And from what he told me, it was a great trip. They went out and they did community service in the lower income portions of Indianapolis. They went out and helped the people who are struggling. They went homeless shelters and all that. It sounded like it was a great trip for them doing service. I'm sure no one's disagreeing that it's a great trip. I think the issue, what people are having, is that no other organizations have applied for it up until now because they didn't know. I mean, it's not Greek Life's fault in the fact that they're pioneering this, that they're pushing this forward. So I don't think we should penalize them for that because, yes, they're 11% of our student body, but they also took the initiative to go out and say, oh, we can get funding for if we go out and do this, which everybody's going to know now because I'm sure this is going to be in the daily campus tomorrow, so I don't think that's an issue. Also, one other thing I've written down, I'll get out of your hair in a second here. The fact that we shouldn't be a bank for students, I mean, that's, before I joined USG, that was my broad image of USG up there in the sky and daily campus. They paid for funding, and that's great. But is it such a bad thing if we're considered to be a bank for funding for what students want to do? I mean, yes, we can pass legislation, we can pass commendations, that's great. We can, advocate for our students. But one of our primary things that we do is we help student organizations pay for what they want to do. As long as it's benefiting this community, it's not a social event, it's not closed event, something like that, we're helping them do that because we do have the funding. And also the concern for UConn getting its funding cut, that doesn't affect USG because we have a set onto the student fee bill, we have that set, so we're not going to lose funding over anything. So I think if we can help student organizations that may be hurt by the cuts that are coming towards the university, I think we should do that.
Thank you, Senator Schofield. Senator Alvarez.
Hello. Well, my biggest problem with this whole thing is that when we were doing the question and answer section, we kept being told that this is essentially community outreach, only it's going under a different department. That's not true. Community outreach is for all of the students in the school. Every single one of them can go on these community outreach trips. No, I could not. Many of you could not go on these fraternity trips. This is for one specific section of the school that we're funding in the same way as we do for opportunities for all the students in the school. The reason we fund community outreach in the way that we do is because it provides that opportunity for students throughout the school that they normally wouldn't have that opportunity. Fraternities will have this opportunity. They had it anyways. They can pay for it anyways. There was 12 members that applied and there was vastly more than 12 members that applied, and it wasn't because and they could have afforded it, essentially. And so us being told that this is the same thing as community outreach when it's not, us funding it the same way as community outreach when it's not the same thing as community outreach, and even Senator Schofield said that this is 11% of the student body. Community outreach is 100% of the student body, not 11%. That's why we fund them in the way that we do. And then we were, further on, we were told that essentially it's $3,100 that goes into executive board's budget that nothing's really done with. And then it just gets cycled back through and then ends up in funding board. Well, that's not the money not going anywhere. That's the money going back to students as a whole. You can't just pretend that the money is not here anymore because we're not spending it immediately. So that's a big, big frustration for me because you can't pretend like we don't have money that we very much do, and we're taking it away from students who, the entire student body, and spending it on a certain select section of the school. And that creates an entire image around the USG that is not what we want. Like the vice president said, we are not a bank. We are we are a body that's supposed to be representing the entire school. We are trying to advocate for all of the students. We are not trying to just fund certain groups that have applied or who have come to us and then said, we want to do this and we want you to pay for or help us pay for it. And there are vastly more groups that have no idea that this is a possibility, that do not get this opportunity, yet we're talking about how this process should be in place after we do this. Well, if the process isn't in place, we can't do this. The process is to make it so every student organization that wants to have an alternative trip can get one. But we're not doing that. We're saying this group, because they've asked for it, can, even though no other group can. And it's not fair. It's not representing the student body, which we're all elected to do, and it's not what USG should be doing. We should put a process in place for this to happen, because then there would be no problem. But if there's not a process, if it's not open to all of these organizations that do essentially would like one, then it's not something that we should or could be doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Alvarez. President Peckus.
All right. So listen, I'm not the bad guy here. All right. We're all on a team here. We all want to do the right thing. Sometimes we screw up. Sometimes we don't. The statements that were made about this not going through exec because this and that and blah blah blah, it wasn't going to pass, political movements and whatever. It's not true. It's patently false. The discussion first happened the Monday before last Senate, and we talked about whether or not we thought this was a good idea. We talked about whether or not we should take a vote. The idea was definitely there. This is executive budget money. Should executive budget be making a vote on this? We didn't take a vote on Wednesday. You all made it perfectly clear to me that you don't think the executive committee should be making decisions on its own. I took that to heart over Thanksgiving break. I came back on Monday to this executive meeting, and when it showed up in old business, the first thing I said was, I'd like to push debate on this topic to Senate. I didn't even say, let's talk about it and then bring it to Senate later. I said, let's not talk about it at all. They made it pretty clear to me that they want to be doing things on their own, and I trust you guys, and I think that it's honestly a little bit condescending to suggest to all of you that because I didn't think I could push it through the executive committee, I'm going to bring it to you underlings. I don't think you guys should view yourselves that way, and I certainly don't. And if this doesn't pass tonight, that's okay. It really is. All of our lives are going to go on. And we're all still going to be friends. I hope. It really doesn't need to be a scandal. And I just want to say that. First of all, paranoia reigns supreme for certain people, but this is not a scandal, I promise you. This is an opportunity that was presented to us. I personally think it's a good opportunity. I wrote some legislation in favor of that opportunity. If you all don't think it's a good opportunity, that's fine. I'll be okay. But I do want to respond substantively to a few things that have been said because I do feel passionately about this. And it's not because I'm a member of fraternity and sorority life. I'm not. That doesn't mean I don't respect what they do. We are given a certain amount of student fees every year to be spent in that year for initiatives that we deem to be valuable to the student body. And our responsibility emanating from those student fees is that we pay special attention to initiatives that help develop the student body, not only as students, but as human beings. This helps students develop themselves as human beings. It's not a matter of whether or not you agree with the community service trip, though. I think most of you would agree that community service is a good thing. And in fact, community service, community outreach does trips to Hartford. They do trips to Mansfield. They do trips to almost anywhere you could believe. And you know why? That's because our community outreach is phenomenal. It is. It's what we're known for. That's part of what we're known for. Our community outreach is outstanding. And Greek Life is a big part of that. Greek Life does their own philanthropy. They do. That's a huge part of what Greek Life does. And so they have money that they pay into these philanthropy events. They clean up Rentschler every weekend after the games. They do a lot of things that people don't recognize. Now, the reason that this didn't go through the Tier 2 funding process is very simply because OFSL is not a Tier 2. We do have policies that are in place to deal with special requests that might sound like this, but not like this. I think the analogy is important. It would be weird for OFSL to ask one of its fraternities or sororities to go in front of USG and ask for money for something that OFSL is planning. It's strange to me. I'm applying to law school right now, and I hope that I can get a scholarship. But for the hearing on whether or not I'm going to get a scholarship, I'm not going to send Michael Daniels to argue for me, because I want to argue that myself, and I respect the fact that they came to us themselves. Now, this is outside of our typical funding process. No doubt about it. It definitely is. There's no reason to be uncomfortable with it. We can do things that are outside of our normal processes. Sometimes things come up. Sometimes we get excited about things. Sometimes we get passionate about things the same way that these students get passionate about community service. And that doesn't mean that we need to take 4 months to develop a process before we support them in what they're doing. I think a process is important. but it doesn't mean we should penalize these students for coming up with an idea first and bringing it to us. Because the students worked just as hard as OFSL did in forming this trip and making this trip what it is, which is a resounding success. Now, yes, it isn't open to everyone. It's open to members of the Greek community. We routinely fund things that aren't open to the entire community. Routinely. Engineering club. You've got to be interested in engineering. Honors, you've got to be smart. Think about that. We fund honors events. You need to have a certain scholastic aptitude to receive that funding. Is that more closed than a fraternity or a sorority? Think about it. Because the 4 pillars of Greek life are service, leadership, scholarship, and brotherhood. Those are the 4 things you need to be committed to join Greek life. You don't have to be smart, although many of them are. You don't have to be interested in engineering. You don't need to know how to build a concrete canoe. I certainly don't. You don't need to be ROTC. You don't need to like marijuana. You have to care about service, leadership, scholarship, and brotherhood. So when you're sitting there and you're thinking, should we be funding something like this alternative spring break? Think about this. You can go home tonight and you can be comfortable with the fact that we adhered to our process. We are so good at reading our process that we just screwed 12 students out of $270. Because that's what it is. We can make sure that the African American Cultural Center has an opportunity to do this. We can make sure that every single cultural center and other interested party on this campus know that this is available. We can do that. But they are not currently in the process of planning their own trips. And time has run out. Gina checks every day across campus to make sure that she has her finger on the pulse of every single alternative break trip that's happening. And you know what her report is? There's nothing else happening. And if there was, we would have known about it. This isn't a CO trip. You're right, it's absolutely not a CO trip. It's an OFSL trip. That's reflected in the name of the legislation. But they have worked closely with CO so that we know we can believe and we can invest in the values that they're teaching their students on this trip. We know that these $3,100 will not go to buy wooden swords for the LARPing club. They will go to pay for maybe a new house in Indianapolis. Maybe a student who suddenly cares about leadership. Maybe a student who wants to come back and run for the president of their Greek life sorority or fraternity. That's what we're investing in. So every single time you come to Senate and you hear a report from Chairman Giardina, and you look at all of that money that's being spent, think about this. Is it open? Not always. Is it beneficial to the student body? Not always. Is this? Yes. And all you have to do is care about service, leadership, scholarship, and brotherhood.
Thank you. Schofield, Alvarez, Rana will all be added, and then will also be added on the speakers list in this order. So it will be Schofield, and then Rana, then Gooding. Gooding's already on there.
Motion for the previous question?
You don't have the floor, Senator Schofield? I do. Chairperson Daniels? Daniels is also already on there. Right now, after President Peckus, Senator Gooding will attain the floor because he's next. Senator Gooding? Is there anybody else who would like to be added to the Senator Rana? He's already on. Great. No, this is Neil. Thank you.
Okay, first thing I would like to say, I am just surprised that I totally agree with Vice President Patel, because we normally don't see eye to eye. But, I totally agree with him as far as USG is not a bank. It is not our job to fund this trip. Now, as Steve said, the students can afford to pay for the trip themselves. Now, I'm gonna have to be a little blunt, and you all know how I am. And just say, if they can't afford to pay for the trip themselves, then don't go on the trip. like Vice President Patel said, if you want to help someone, go to Hartford, help someone. Like, you know, there's plenty of homeless people we can help. But nothing's like a little humor. But as far as the cultural centers, I personally know the cultural centers are not aware that USG can fund an alternative spring break. Like I said, I'm also co-social chair for WISO, which is West Indian Student Organization, which is under the African American Cultural Center, and we wanted to do something like this. And I wasn't aware of this. And also, since I received the legislation, I went around to the cultural centers, talked to my constituents, and just said, like, how do you feel about this? Were you aware of this? And all of them told me, no, I didn't know we can do this. And I think we should be alarmed. The fact that the majority of the executive board is against it, that tells us something. You know, if we only have 2 members of the executive board for it, like that, there's a red flag. That tells you something. Now, Senator Schofield said that he feels like his judgment is sort of a little clouded. You may not have used those exact words. But basically, that's what you were saying because you're part of Greek life. So, with that being said, I remember Ed answering my question, and he told me he's a part of Greek life. So, I just sort of feel like, and maybe this is just my own personal opinion, I just feel like his judgment is a little clouded because he's a part of Greek life. And I feel like this is a political move. He was trying to help out Greek life. So, you know, come on. And I just can't help but wonder, too. Now, if this was the cultural centers, would these 2 authors come up here and say, like, hey, we want to give you the funding for the alternative spring break? No, it wouldn't have happened. Let's be honest, people. So let's do the right thing and not vote for this legislation. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Senator Gooding. Chairperson Daniels.
I'm keeping it real, brother.
Right in the
All
heart.
right.
Right in the heart.
I'm going to take a moment to respond to a few of the things that have been said since I had my turn to debate. First of all, we seem to have a conflict of whether or not we want to attract university departments to apply for funding for USG. When we talk about the honors break, as you've said, they do go through Honors Council, which is a tier 2. They go through funding board. They do have an association with the Honors Council. It's not, in this case, where it's very different because there's a large number of tier 2s, sorority and fraternity life. So let's address what the president said about that it would be somehow awkward for a student who's a member of one of those tier 2s to come through the funding board process or to come here next semester when we have the legislative requests to ask for funding. I don't think that'd be a bad way of doing it at all. You know, the president says that you know, you can go home and think, well, I stood for the process, but I, you know, penalize these students. We're not penalizing them at all. They still have the opportunity to get this funding. They can do it through the legislative request process. I'm proud of the process that we built when we changed funding policies, and I don't see that we're penalizing anyone if we go through that process as opposed to approving this legislation, which does open the door for university departments, having heard, as we said, will probably be in the daily campus, that, oh, now USG funds things. You just go to Senate and you can be a department, and if you're a department that organized something that a student participates in, oh, take it to Senate. I don't think that's what we're trying to open the door to. I think we want to stick with the process that we have created. A couple of you have raised the point about, is it disingenuous for us to say that because a number of members of exec does not support this legislation, that you shouldn't support it, and that's not what we're saying. The point that's being made, and I hate to have to respond to what President Peck has said on this, is that a number of us are under the impression that the only reason he decided to bring you in on this is because he could not pass it through exec. You know, and he accused me, I believe, of being condescending or something of that nature, but I'm just trying to tell the truth to you that when he asked me after Thanksgiving break whether yes or no I would vote for it in exec, he said no, and he said, okay, then I'm definitely bringing it to Senate. Last of all, addressing Senator Schofield again, you know, it's great. Schofield, I'm sorry. It's great that, as opposed to doing any of a number of things that Greek Life could be doing, that they are making this commitment to community service. I disagree with the notion that if you can't afford to go on the trip, that you shouldn't go. But I think that we can fund this process. It's just a matter of how we fund it, how we go about things, and whether or not this is the way we ought to do it. Thank you.
Daniels, we have Chairperson Lowe.
Okay. So after I say everything, I'm not a senator, so I can't call the previous question, but if somebody comes up soon enough, call it, because this is getting ridiculous. Steve saying that's absolutely not true is absolutely not true. This did happen in exec, and this basically is him stripping exec of all of our powers. And it's basically ridiculous. Like, I don't even know how this is happening. Other than that, to be in honors, you have to be smart. You don't have to pay to be smart. You have to pay to be in a fraternity or sorority. I'm not in one because I can't afford to be in one. So I can't go on this trip because I'm not in a sorority. I asked Todd if you're not in a sorority, if you can go on the trip, and he said no. So all of what's been said is kind of a lie, and it's getting ridiculous. And I don't even like this anymore. It's like, this is like so catty.
Lowe, Senator Innes.
Okay. Hi guys. Okay, so last time that President Pekis was up here, he essentially stole my speech with a lot more eloquence than I could give it. But I am a sister of Pi Beta Phi. I've been a sister since fall of 11. And I just want to clear up a few technical errors that have been said a little bit in terms of how the funding works for us and in terms of the money that we put into the system. The money that we pay in our dues goes towards recruitment, which has not been said, which takes up a good portion of the money that we put in. And we put in a lot of money into other people's philanthropies as well as our own. And that means that the organizations one of the pillars that was mentioned by Steve, ours personally is leadership and reading. So we put in a lot of money in terms of that. That doesn't go into the God bless you. In terms of the philanthropy of Greek life as a whole. When President Petkis brought up the analogy of football, he was absolutely correct in saying that one organization, one chapter of Greek life should not be responsible for paying for a trip that applies to all of Greek life. And that, I believe, was absolutely correct. And I want to also say that this is an unprecedented opportunity for USG. Somebody came up and said, we want to break away from the strands of what we usually do in USG, and we want to fund something that is outside of our usual bounds, and I think that this is a very good opportunity for us to grow. In 2009, it was pointed out that a comptroller came and said, we would like to reach out to community outreach and fund some alternative breaks. Look where we are now. They have a lot of money coming in from us, and they have an opportunity from growth thanks to us. So what is to say that the same thing could not happen again? We're taking a step towards something new, and for all we know, it could grow to be something that 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, it could be even bigger. I also think that, sorry, just looking at my notes. Okay, finally I'd like to say that as a senator, it was my choice in running is that taking people, the students, paying students of this university who have different issues that they would like to see addressed, and making them into a reality, addressing them and bringing them towards the next step. And this is exactly what this is. A group of students on campus, whether they are affiliated with Greek life or not, have come to us and said, hey, we'd like some money to do something extraordinary. And this is exactly what we are giving them. And I think that even though this doesn't have precedented consequences, I think that we should take the side effects of this that are bound to happen, and so we can build on something that can be better in the future, because this is, like I said, it is unprecedented, but we can take those challenges and write it into a policy and write it into a process after this is all gone through to make it even stronger and to make the funding board even stronger. And my name is on the legislation as a sponsor, and I would like to say that I firmly stand by that decision, and I hope that this goes through.
next to Chief of Staff Nagby.
Our staff not being.
Chief of Staff Nagby.
I do not have a vote, so I will not be swaying you either way. So let me begin with that. In the past, alternative breaks have always gone through community outreach, and that's always been one thing. And like President Peck has said, does not have to be that way forever. We have a new system that we just passed a couple months ago through a funding board. Now, this was brought to our attention about 2 weeks ago, which is still fine, but we still have another opportunity to fund those groups that weren't able to go through funding board with the new process that we have set forth, which is basically starting next week. If they get 2 senators to sponsor this, as far as I understand, they can still get it passed through Senate, correct? Why don't they do it that way? I don't see a reason why not. But the thing is, what I really wanted to say is I fully support alternative breaks, and I fully support the last line of this legislation. Be it further resolved, the undergraduate, that line right there, that we begin reviewing alternative spring break funding for the 2013-2014 academic year. And I think that should definitely be put into place tonight. I think that is important. I don't think we should strike down this entire piece of legislation. I think we should keep that into consideration when we vote later on tonight, that a process needs to be put into place right now.
Thank you, Chief of Staff Nagby. Vice President Patel.
As I mentioned before when I was speaking, that the proponent for this legislation have a good option when they're coming here and trying to persuade you how to vote. That's your emotions. You know, it's easy to say who's against funding trips that help people. It's really hard to say that. You know, we see it in the national legislature. Who's against Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? It's hard to be against those things. But at the same time, does that come at cost of fairness? Do we do that? Do we take our emotions and apply it to a legislation at the cost of fairness for every single student on this campus? Is that what we want to do? We want to say, because I feel like service trip is important, fairness isn't. Is that your intent? Because that's what I'm getting out of this debate. That emotions are more important than equality for every single person and every single student on this campus. And this is unprecedented opportunity. We could make sure that everyone has a chance to go on a trip, not just 10% of students, as Senator Schofield has mentioned. Every single student should have the opportunity, not 10% of students. And the difference between other organizations and Greek life is the fact that, one, you have to pay money in Greek life. Two, there are a lot of commitments that you have to make in order to join. And someone could correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to be a member, they could deny your membership if they choose to do so. Do you think if you're smart that you're going to be denied a membership into honors program? If you graduate with a 4.0 and get a 2400 on SATs and you write the best personal statement that anyone has ever read, are you going to be denied from honors? No. It's up to you to decide if you could get into those programs. But with Greek life, you could be denied even if you do every single thing right, even if you follow those 4 pillars. That's the difference. That's what we are considering here. And when I say we have an unprecedented opportunity, let's think about how we make this fair for every single student on this campus. Let's just not say, you know, we see it that it's unfair that these are the first group that we are funding, and it's not fair that everyone didn't know about this. But that doesn't mean we have to penalize them. Well, by funding and giving this opportunity to only 10% of students, you are discriminating against and not giving that same opportunity to the 90% of students. We have to make sure that we are not making this fair for 10% at expense of everyone else. That's not our business. That is not what we are here to do. And so when this comes down, don't think about if service is good or bad. Don't think about what you're gonna think about at night when you leave this body. Think about if you were on the side of fairness. That's what we need to think about. Because we all agree that service is important. We are here. I could be studying for exams that I'm taking to become a teacher, but I'm here doing this because I think it's important to serve your community, to give back to the people who gave you so much. So the merit isn't here. Is service important? The point of contention is this the fairness that we are looking for within USG and how we do business on this campus? That's the question you need to answer. And if you think this is fair, giving money to one organization and then telling everyone else, we are going to have a different process for you. You're not going to be able to come to use this process. Then, you know what? Vote for it. You're justified to vote for it if you think that this is fair. That's all I have to say. I hope you take my remarks into consideration. Thank you.
Vice President Patel. Senator Schofield is next. You're already on the list, Senator Schofield, and you have the floor.
I think it's interesting how Vice President Patel says that this is discriminatory towards the 90% of the students who are not eligible to take part of this trip. My personal opinion is that just because the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life may not be a Tier 2 organization, simply because the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life is the only sort of umbrella organization for all the fraternities and sororities, just because they're applying for their spring break funding, but no one else is, I think it would be discriminatory for us to say no to them. They applied, they worked hard, they put their application forward, they worked with the community outreach office to do this, and for us to say no simply based on that they're the only ones because no one else knew, is not fair. They looked into this and they found out, oh, we can do this, so they went ahead and did it. Other groups didn't look into it. Could they have looked into it? Could they have asked around? Yes, they could have. And now when this gets out, because I'm sure this is going to be a big deal, this is probably going to make the front page of the newspaper, for next year's spring break, they will have the opportunity to do that. No one's saying that a department or another group can't apply for an alternative spring break funding. Just because they didn't do it this time doesn't mean that we shouldn't fund the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. Just because they did it, are we going to say, no, we can't fund you this year, but next year if you apply again, there'll be other people, so yeah, it'll be okay? No. Just because they took the initiative to do it and they're the only people to do it this year doesn't mean we shouldn't give them funding. Anybody could have applied for this funding, and because just they did, I don't see how we should deny them that. So I'd like to motion to recall the previous question.
Call the previous question. Senator Schofield would like to call the previous question. Is there a second on the floor to call the previous question? Seconded by Senator Manfredi. Now we move into a vote. I'm sorry, my mic is acting up. We're going to move into a vote on whether we should call the previous question or not. That is to say, we're going to vote whether we want to end the debate or not. Okay? So all those in favor of calling the previous question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, please signify by saying nay. Nay. I believe it thoroughly passed, unless anyone wants to call a division. Call a division. Okay. We'll do it by standing vote. We'll do it by standing vote. All those in favor of calling the previous question, please stand up. Right? Okay. Now we're going to move into a vote. I, as the chair, but also as a senator from CLES, would like to ask or remind the exercise some executive privilege here. Before we move into a vote, this is going to be a roll call vote because I'm going to call roll call. Please consider, this is going to be in the minutes. If you are a member of Greek, any sort of Greek organization, a fraternity or sorority, whether you are for or against this bill, because I know we had representation on both sides of this debate. Please consider if you want your name as a member of a Greek organization attached in public record, probably printed in the campus.
This is way out of line. This is way out of line.
This is way out of line.
You can't say that everybody has to recuse themselves.
Point of order,
Part
have the floor.
All right, you're right. That's fine. I'm sorry. Okay, let's move into a vote.
Point of order, yes you can. It's in the bylaws that you have to be on.
No, this isn't directly affecting whether or not I can vote yes or no. I'm not going on this trip. I don't know who else is going on.
I have the floor. I withdraw my, listen, all I was trying to do is ensure some equality. That's all. I don't have a vote. Okay? I don't. So that's all I was trying to do. And I'm really sorry. Okay? Can we move into a vote, please? All right. All those in favor, this is a roll call. Okay? So we're gonna go down the list. All those in favor of enacting an act as presented by the President, please signify by, when your name is called, please signify by saying aye. If you're opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions, please signify by abstaining. Right? Senator Alvarez.
Nay.
Senator Bosco is not here. Senator Casazola is not here. Senator Chen. Senator Chang is not here. Senator Chaudhary. Senator Chow. Senator Kadek is not here. Senator Gandhi abstains. Senator Giardina is not here. Senator Gooding.
Nay.
Senator Guggens is not here. Senator Brandt is not here. Senator Fershaw.
Nay.
Senator Innes. Senator Jones.
Nay.
Senator Clark is not here. Senator Krishna.
Abstain.
Senator Lundin is not here. Senator Lakshmar Naika. Senator Manfredi.
Nay.
Senator McCabe.
Nay.
Senator Benetti. Senator Modi.
Nay.
Senator Paul.
Nay.
Senator Perez is not here. Senator Rana.
Nay.
I'm sorry, this was Neil Rana.
Nay.
Senator Park Rana.
Nay.
Senator Rifkin.
Abstain.
Senator Sargent.
Nay.
I'm sorry, I skipped Senator Rowe.
Nay.
Senator Sargent.
Nay.
Senator Schofield.
Aye.
Senator Smith.
Nay.
Senator Verbeek. Senator Verbeek. He's one of the presidents. Okay. Senator Violet.
Aye.
Senator Ward.
Aye.
Senator Wanderberger. I'm sorry? And Senator Wiley. Motion carries. Now, I would like to take a moment to explain what just happened. I'm really sorry. All I was trying to say was, this was one of the first publishable votes that we've done, if I remember correctly. It was a big vote. We spent 2 hours debating it. The campus is here. All I was trying to, the campus being the DC, the other campus, all I was trying to do was ensure that everybody kept in mind all the different conflicts of interest. And it was an error in judgment. Okay? So I'm sorry about that. All right. Now we move into discussion. Is there anybody who would like to be recognized for discussion? Senator Gooding, and then Senator Ryan, and then Senator Violet. Yes.
Come on, Dave.
Okay, so since Schofield called the previous question, I didn't get to say what I wanted to say, so I'll keep it short. All right, a couple of weeks ago when we did have Senate, I remember I came up here when we were debating about whether certain people should have control of the additional revenue fund. And I was like totally against that, and I said like him and some other people were corrupt. And now that this whole thing has transpired, it just brings me to what I initially said. certain people in, I don't care if the camera's rolling either, certain people in the executive board is corrupt, and I guess we know who they are. So that's all I wanted to say.
Senator Goody?
Yes?
We can keep in line with the policy.
I won't say no more, that's all.
I understand, but as a chair of this meeting, I just want to emphasize to all of our senators who get the floor, being here is a tremendous responsibility. It's also a tremendous right that you have, and we will try and keep in line with the spirit of deciding on the Senate operating policy and procedures. With that, we'll move forward to Senator Rana, who wanted to be recognized for discussion.
Could we pull up the acronym at the very bottom of it? So the last part says, be it resolved, the undergraduate student government will review the process by which university departments apply for alternative spring break funding for the 2013 and 14 academic year. We didn't pass this. But that last part is important. We should create a process. This should be there. I know. Chief of Staff Nakvi did mention this. What I want to iterate is that what Vice President Patel said is, we're doing this in idea of fairness. If we had passed this, this would have allowed the Indianapolis spring break alternative trip to have been funded, but under different processes than what every other one would have been after this. We need to have fairness, and I think we can establish this, and this process should be developed. And I would be happy to work with President Petkis and Comptroller Corshane to make this happen.
I would too, but what I will say is, because this is discussion, and because the floor always goes back to the chair, which is really nice. What I will say is, let's since this is discussion, let's try and work on some legislation for this. Let's make this a priority. It says 2013 to 2014, which means we have a semester to work on it. But let's make sure that that process is not only vetted, but it's put into place as quickly as possible. I think the President and the Comptroller would agree with establishing a system like that. We can also take some time to talk about some of the other points of contention, including the equitability arguments, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my piece for discussion. Who else do we have on the list? David? Let's go for Senator Schofield.
I would just like to publicly apologize to Comptroller Corshane for a member of this body perhaps suggesting that he may be corrupt. I have full faith and confidence in his actions as Comptroller.
Thank you, Senator Schofield. Senator Owens, Violet.
Hey everyone, so first of all, I just want to thank you for a pretty reasonable debate. That was actually really good. I'm glad that everyone managed to voice their opinions without things getting way out of hand, so that was great. And yeah, so basically just keep in mind, let's try not to personally attack any body or person in Senate, because like we're all here to basically push forward what we think is the best idea for our community. And you know, everyone's feelings should be heard, but let's not try to drag them into the mud. Besides that, I want to, Senator Rana Neal, basically stole the words out of my mouth. I definitely do think that a process should be put in place. Also, if I may ask a point of information, what was the answer to the question that Chief of Staff Nakvi proposed to you? Because I missed that. So is there currently in place, if they, can they apply through that funding that's coming up in a couple weeks? Can they apply for that?
Starting on January 21st, whenever we get back from that semester, are the funding policies as they were passed 2 months ago allow individual students to plan and apply for a proposal. It does not necessarily allow them to put together something as a group, though it would imply that they would. The procedure for that is going to be tricky because we've never done it before.
All right, so let's work out that procedure, guys.
Is there anybody else who would like to be recognized for discussion? Senator Sargent? Well, actually, I know, that's something that's put into place in the refund process. Maybe Ed, you can help out with this. But at the same time, we just spent like 2 hours discussing one expenditure of $3,100, right? So legislative requests, if I remember correctly, are budgeted at a total of $20,000 for next semester. I know Ed and John were talking about potentially bumping that up or bringing that down, but this was $3,100. Imagine if we had to do that roughly 7 times. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that all of them will be as contentious as this one, but maybe it's worth thinking about legislative requests as well. Since this is a discussion, it doesn't need to be voted on. We don't need to debate or call to order or whatever. Just think about it, because this is how long this one thing took, and that was the only thing on the agenda, right? So maybe it's worth, again, revisiting the process by which we well, everything. But, yeah, that's it. All right, fine. Who's next? Sorry.
How's everybody doing tonight? I was a little bit quiet during this debate because I thought it was interesting to listen to everybody's points. I just want to commend this governing body for doing a wonderful job participating. You all did a great job. I want to point something out that in the beginning of Senate, before this debate happened, that Chairperson Daniels brought up the whole, I don't know if any of you read the email by the president. It's something that's very concerning, and I think something that's big here, now taking the next step, is fiscal responsibility. And that's key in this governing body, and I know it's hard to, especially what the Vice President said, and I'm very happy that he said this, nobody likes when you pick out, to look at the big picture, go after Medicare, or go after Social Security. So if you look at it this way, there are going to be cuts that are going to be made, and as Senator Schofield pointed out, though the amount of money that we receive is fixed, this might incentivize other departments or organizations that now are losing money, more money is coming out of their pocket to come to USG. So that's also something we have to take in mind and take into effect. So please, I encourage you, really take what Chairperson Daniel said to heart, go to your constituents, talk to them, and see what their problems are, and we encourage you to come talk to Chairperson Daniels and I, come to External Affairs, because we're going to be working closely throughout the entire state and see if we can get this problem fixed. Thanks, guys.
Something that I forgot to mention in my report was that we need to appoint members to the elections oversight chair for a committee. And so at this point, I just want to remind our chairperson, Smith, if she wants to do that. Thank you.
So I have a whopping 2 people to appoint to the Elections Oversight Committee. The first is Jigesh Patel, and and the second, he's not part of Senate this year, but Sam Tracy. Sarah accepts.
Any questions for the nominees? Or is there a motion first to nominate? Violet and seconded by Alvarez. Questions? Is there any debate? Seeing none, we move into a vote. All those in favor of ratifying Chairperson, I guess you would be the chair, right, of this committee. So Chairperson Smith's nominations to these committees, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Passes. Thank you. We move into, well, before we do, is Andy here? Maybe. He's not here? Yes. Oh, Andy Wine. Rebecca, membership coordinator, D'Angelo just reminded me that this might be one of the last times we get to see you. Is that correct? Yeah. Andy Wine is the communications director. He's done a lot of phenomenal work for this organization. I think it would be great after such a crazy Senate to give him a round of applause for his service. We really appreciate it. It was President Peckus's cabinet member, and we are. I'm sorry, not we. President Peckus and his staff is looking for a communications director, if I remember correctly. So thank you so much, Andy. You've been great.
No problem.
Yo, give me a shout out.
Any announcements? Sir Sergeant. Comptroller Corchain after the chairperson announces.
Hey guys, just real quick. I don't know if some of you may or may not know, I'm also part of the College Republicans here on campus, and our former president, Joe Gasser, will be also graduating at the end of this semester. So for those of you who do know him, he was a wonderful man. He was actually part of USG last year, and he made a great contribution to this organization. And we will be holding a surprise party for him next Tuesday. So if you're all welcome to come, there'll be pizza. So please, I hope to see you all there. Thank you guys.
It's really quick, but I just wanted to emphasize to you guys how important it is that you be at our special Senate next week. Because at special Senate next week, we'll be approving the funding for all Tier 2 student organizations. So if we don't have quorum at that meeting, then we'll have to figure out how we're going to be able to give any money to anybody. So please, 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 please be there at that meeting. Let Shiv know if you can't be there so we can make arrangements to make sure that we have quorum. It's hugely important. Hugely. Like, I can't, like this much. Like, I can't even tell you how important it is that we have quorum. What do we need? Quorum. Thank you.
We'll have quorum. I have faith in you guys.
If you guys don't know, I also serve on policy council for SUBOG. Due to a class conflict for next semester, I won't be able to be our rep, so if you have any interest in doing that, please contact me, contact Steve, and we'll have to get the process rolling on that.
Ian?
Just a reminder, I am looking for a replacement for myself to be the residential affairs chairperson. So shoot me a text, email, phone, pigeon, however it works for you.
Any other announcements?